Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us today. Welcome to Beyond the Celebrations. So this is where we are going to pick off of our Black History Month series that we had through February and through March, and continue now just once a month instead of every week on Wednesday at 1 p.m. And today is our first event in the series, Beyond Celebrations, and we are super excited about our guest speaker today. From the DPS Celebrates team, we have Chanel Sidbury, Executive Director of K-12 Curriculum and Instruction. We also have my colleague and partner in crime, Mrs. Kelly Stevens, who is the History and Civic Engagement Specialist on the line with me today. And we will be introducing shortly who our guest speaker is, but we're going to leave you in a little bit of more suspense. If you checked out our website, celebrate.dpsnc.net, you already know a little bit about who he is and what he's going to be doing today. Next slides, please. So that will segue into telling you a little bit more about our DPS Celebrates website. Again, it is celebrate.dpsnc.net. And on our website, we have it available in English and in Spanish. And there is a new page every month that's added with the new monthly celebrations. It also includes a monthly calendar, monthly flyers like you see here on this slide for April to the left. All the information and resources that we provide are in response to our DPS population and to highlight awareness around different celebrations, events, and holidays around the world. We also feature a character trait of the month each month, as well as academic celebrations, cultural celebrations, and social media celebrations and campaigns through DPS. We also take the time to create some Zoom backgrounds, like you see the one that we're using today for Holocaust Remembrance Day, as well as Bitmoji classrooms. And there are e-libraries available each month with ebooks around all of our topics, or most of our topics for the month, as well as a lot of different resources that can be used by teachers with students in their instruction and lesson planning, as well as students being able to use with their families. So for the month of April, we're going to specifically highlight the character trait of the month, which is perseverance. We are celebrating Arab American Heritage Month, as well as Global Youth Service Day, and of course, Holocaust Remembrance Day, which is going to be our focus for today's Beyond the Celebrations live event. And at this time, I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Ms. Kelly Stevens, to introduce our guest speaker today.
Thanks so much, Melissa. I appreciate that. So I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce someone who lives local right here in our Triangle community. In this picture on the right-hand side, we've got Steve Goldberg. Now, Steve is also a social studies educator, and with him in the picture is Mr. Abe Piacek, who is a Holocaust survivor. Steve, please join us and introduce yourself a little bit more.
Hello, thanks. Yeah, so my name is, oh, there we go. I'm going to share screen in a sec, but yeah, my name is Steve Goldberg, and I've taught history for more than 20 years. And Abe Piacek came and spoke at Research Triangle High School, where I was teaching in November of 2018. And I'll go ahead and share screen here and tell you a little bit about him. If we go to present, there we go. So Abe, I knew, as y'all know, like schools are busy places, and our German teacher actually arranged for Abe to come and speak. It was a not a celebration, but a commemoration of 80 years since Kristallnacht, the destruction of synagogues and businesses throughout Germany and Austria in 1938. And so in 2018, we had a Kristallnacht speaker come, and you're busy teachers, most folks watching here, and people are busy. And so I asked, what's the guy's name? And the Thursday before, I was told his name was Abe Piacek. And if you Google Abe Piacek, Piasek, there's a remarkable amount of stuff there now, some of which I've put up, but there was a lot there when I first learned about him. And I spent probably 5 hours reading about and listening to videos about Abe before I even met him. And as you can see here, he was separated from his family at age 13, survived 3 death camps, so definitely relevant to the perseverance idea here. 1 in Poland near where he was born, and 2 in Germany. And when he was liberated, if you've ever seen those pictures of the emaciated skeleton-like people, that's pretty much what Abe looked like. There are no pictures of him in that state, but he weighed less than 75 pounds when he was 16 and a half years old. And that's just kind of remarkable. I met him when he was 90 and I was 50. I'm 52 now, coming up on 53. And he struck me as this remarkable person. We didn't have an auditorium at my school, and he actually spoke 4 times. He spoke to our 9th graders for 45 minutes. He spoke to our 10th graders for 45 minutes. He was tired and got a ride back to Raleigh where he lived at the time. And then he came back the following week and spoke to our 11th and 12th graders. And I said to him, I want to get to know you better, man. Can I have your email? And he laughed and he said, I don't do email. And he gave me his phone number. And so I called him up and went over to his house and got to know him. And I love this quote here. Just what he did was, he said, if we could stop hating and start loving, maybe we could make the world a better place. And he actually invited me to go with him to Fort Bragg. I've never been to Fort Bragg, and this was pre-COVID. I got sick with like the flu or something, and I didn't want to give it to him. So I said, I'd love to go with you, but I don't want to get you sick. So I didn't get to go with him there. Why learn about the Holocaust? Why is this important? It's the most extreme example of what can happen if hate and dehumanization are, it's somebody else's problem, right? If you're indifferent to that rather than resisting it actively. And I'm hoping that folks would take me up on an offer. I can't tell his story in 20 minutes, but I'll give you an overview. And if you're interested, please follow up with me. I'd love to visit as many schools as possible to carry on Abe's legacy. And by hearing Abe's legacy, I'm hoping that students and teachers and everybody can be more inclined to stand up to hate and discrimination and dehumanization, and to draw inspiration from Abe. Ellie Wiesel.
And Steve, you mentioned that you're speaking on behalf of Abe. Abe spoke to numerous schools across the Triangle. He was featured on News and Observer, on WRAL News, I think Spectrum News, trying to think, maybe even ABC News. I'm trying to think what else is around here, NBC, for all of the efforts that he did. And you're right, when he spoke in the classrooms, for people who aren't used to teaching all day long and speaking all day long, it's a lot to ask to do this 4 times, but he did, and he did it with grace. He did it with enthusiasm and excitement, and no class was different from one another. You couldn't tell that he got tired. But why are you speaking on his behalf?
Well, he asked me to. Yeah, that's a great question. So I think these are different moments in Abe's life that I've learned about since I've gotten to know him. This is from a displaced persons camp. This is the first time he ever spoke about the Holocaust in 1995. He was liberated in 45, so he spent 50 years not talking about it. And this is a picture of him from 2019. And I love this picture of him. I think it captures his personality really well. I was going to let him introduce himself, and then I will answer the question that you asked. It's a good one. But this is just so you can hear Abe's voice. This is Abe introducing himself. Introduce yourself. Who are you? Where do you live today? And how old are you?
Well, how old are you? I'm 90 and a half. Yeah, my name is Abe Piasek. I was born in Poland in 1928. And I came to the United States in 1947.
And how did that happen?
That's a really long story, and a good one. After the war, but during the war was bad.
Abe is given to understatement. During the war was bad. So I mentioned earlier that he came to my school and I asked him if I could interview him after that. And he said, sure. And I felt a little uneasy taking pictures at his house, but I mentioned to some friends that I'd gone, he's preparing donuts for me here. Excellent host. And I told my friends I went and talked to this Holocaust survivor and they said, did you video it? And I said, no, that would be weird. And they said, you're a moron. How can you, if you meet with a Holocaust survivor who's 90, you have to video it. So the second time I went, I asked him if I could video and I videoed our conversation. We talked for a while. I'm packing up my notes and I told Abe that some of my students were interested in visiting the Holocaust Museum. And Abe said, I've never been there. Maybe I'll go with you. And I said, are you serious? He said, yeah. So I got permission from his daughter who lives in the area, and we put together a GoFundMe page and we were able to pay for Abe's family to go. And my students got a subsidized trip. And we had this incredibly powerful experience. That's Abe wearing a cap that says world's greatest great grandpa. And two of his great granddaughters were with us on the trip. And long story short, Abe finds out that there's a cattle car inside the museum. And he is surrounded by, 15, 20 people. There's a diagonal walkway that goes through the cattle car to the other side. And we're all around him. And he narrates his liberation story for us, which I'm getting chills just thinking about it. Like his heart is pounding out of his chest. It was an unbelievably brave thing that he did. And so after he did that, I was like, I need to follow up with him. I started interviewing him. I'm all excited to bring him back to my school. And he recorded this introduction for my students in August of 2019. So you'll hear from Abe one more time here.
Hi guys, I'll see you soon. Make sure you have a lot of questions for me. Okay? Then we'll talk about everything you wanted.
And tell them your name and a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. Call me Abe. Okay? And I'm 90. And I can't wait to see you to talk about it.
All right.
Okay.
And pronounce the name of the town where you grew up for us.
Białobrzegi.
Okay. And we'll look up on a map.
Look it up on the map. It's between Warsaw and Radom.
Okay. And then you came to the U.S. on the Marine Flasher.
Yeah, on the Marine Flasher in 1947.
Okay, and we have a record of that at Ellis Island as well. So.
No, not Ellis Island. No.
Yeah, they have a record.
They have a record of me?
Yeah.
Really?
You're on the ship manifest.
Oh my goodness, I didn't know that.
I think I have it on my computer. I'll show you that.
I didn't know that. I have no idea. See?
All right. Well,
so you find out.
The power of research.
Right, correct, yeah.
All right, well, we will see you soon.
Take care, guys.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
And I think one of the strengths of the presentation, the way I'm doing it, is it feels like you're having a conversation with Abe. I weave in lots of clips of him talking for 3-4 minutes, and I put it in context. But just so you all know, as a history teacher, I wanted to know, like, am I right? Did he come through Ellis Island? And if you haven't been to Ellis Island's website, my goodness, it's a treasure trove of information. And this is the ship manifest that left Bremen on July 24th, 1947, arrived in New York on August 3rd. And there on the manifest is Abram Piasek. We know him as Abe. And he was 18 years old when he came to the US. This is not Abe on the ship, but I guess that was a popular haircut at the time. This is a picture of Abe from a displaced persons camp after the war in Germany. And that's the size of the Marine Flasher. What I often will do for students is measure out how far the ship would be relative to their school so they can better identify with it. And it's the size of most schools. I don't remember I think it's like 450 or 500 feet long. That's the actual ticket that he came over on. And his family did a celebration for him in 2007, 60 years of freedom for Abe. This picture was actually taken by someone on the ship as it pulled into New York Harbor in 1947. So I'm all excited to bring Abe to my school. And Abe fell. He was working in his garage and he fell and he was hospitalized. And in true Abe fashion, he's telling the nurses and telling the doctors he's a survivor. And they say, well, would you give a talk? And he said, sure. And so this was the TV camera and he's setting up in front of people. There's 60, 70 people, nurses, doctors, staff, and they're all here to hear Abe tell his story. This was the last public speech that he gave. And I went and visited him. He was rehabbing at his daughter's house, and he's in great spirits, and we're talking, and then his health started to decline, and he passed away on Martin Luther King's birthday on January 15th. This is from the next day, but he died on January 15th, 2020 at age 91. And a few days before he died, very long answer to your question, Kelly, he said, I saw him on the 12th of January, and he was very weak, but he asked me if I would keep telling his story. Pause. And I said I would. And I'm not Abe, and this is Zoom, but I will do my best. And then here I would launch into more of Abe telling his story. For this, I'm just going to sort of describe what I do, but I think I can give you an overview of Abe's story, and then we could like do some questions or whatever we have time for at the end. But he said, look it up on a map. It's between Warsaw and Radom. For most students, they're not going to know even that this is Poland and this is Germany. So I would make sure that they know that. Here's Warsaw, here's Radom, and right in between is Białobrzegi. And so Abe lived there for the first, Zoom things in my way, hang on a sec. For the first, it looks like 14 years. He was about to turn 14 when he was taken from his family and brought to a slave labor camp called Radom. And if you know, I mean, the conditions are pretty typical of slave labor camps. Very little food, very hard work, up at 5 in the morning, people killed for almost no reason. It was a pretty horrible existence. He was there for 2 years, and then the Soviet Union was coming this way, so Germany wanted to move its assets, which is how it thought about people who were slave laborers, to more into Germany. And so he and others, like 2,000, more than 2,000 people with him, marched 55 miles to a train station called Tomaszow Mazowiecki. And that's where he was put into a cattle car for the first time in his life. That cattle car took him to Auschwitz. I have a clip of him describing what it was like to survive both the cattle car and the selection at Auschwitz. If you were determined to be strong enough to work, they would put you to work. If not, you would be burned in the crematoria. And he and the most of the folks with him were good workers, and they were sent to a place called Vaihingen. That's a pretty long trip to take. It wouldn't be that straight line. It would take several days with very little food, almost no food, and very little water. And he was there for those months. And then he was transferred to Hessenthal and was there until April. And then he describes his liberation story going from Hessenthal to Dachau. His train was bombed on both sides by Allied forces, and he was able to escape and be free. If you Google Abe Piasek People magazine, there's a great picture of Abe pointing to George Rose, who was one of his liberators. And Morris Glass is another survivor who lived in the Raleigh area who passed away in 2017. Abe passed away in 2020, and George Rose passed away in 2016. Zev Harel is still alive and lives in Greensboro. And if you want a speaker for your class, get in touch with the Holocaust Speakers Bureau and ask about Zev Harel. He's 90 and he's remarkable. One last video clip I'll show you, and I think we're okay on time for. I was typing. Yeah. So this Anthony Wilson, you may recognize from local media. He did a piece on Abe and I, the trip that we were taking to the Holocaust Museum, and I turned the tables on Anthony and recorded him on Zoom. And this is him talking about Abe, and I'll let him have the last word here.
The one thing that came to mind when I look back on interviewing Abe, he projected tremendous dignity and humility at the same time. I mean, he obviously knew what he went through, and unlike some people who've gone through a traumatic experience, was willing to discuss it, not just with me, but more importantly with those students, and to help them understand what for most people is a concept, but because the experience was so awful and so horrible, especially for someone of the age he was at the time, for him to be willing to talk about that not once, but more than once, and in very candid terms, was very impressive to me, because it's hard to get people to talk about traumatic experiences under the best of circumstances.
He has a little
Yes.
book where he records the different schools that he spoke in, and he must have spoke at 100, almost 150 schools over the past decade. He must have spoke to 10,000 people.
You know, we've seen movies which have dramatized the horrors of the Holocaust. We've seen documentaries which are even harder to watch, because some of that was obviously the real footage as opposed to simulated suffering. We've heard about the liberation of the camps, but he was a man who was willing to speak about it and share his experience. And for him to be, while he was with us, living history was really a gift to everybody he spoke with.
I think that was all.
The one thing.
Yeah, if you to get in touch with me, my email is pretty basic. It's mrgoldberg@gmail.com, and there's a beta website up, myfriendabe.com, that has more details. I'm going to stop sharing. It's really important to check your math. And after I recorded that video, 10,000 is way too low. He actually gave one speech at Mount Olive College, where there are about 1,500 people at that one speech alone. So there were some times when he spoke to small groups, but like when he spoke at Research Triangle, he spoke to our whole school. So that's 500 students right there in 2 visits. So when I redid the math, he spoke to easily 20,000 people. And my goal is to speak to at least that many people. I've already spoken to close to 1,000 people. This is sort of the big time for Holocaust education because of Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Remembrance Day. And I would love to be able to speak in any schools in Durham or with Zoom. I could anywhere. Happy to do it. I know, Kelly, you had the opportunity to have Abe speak multiple times to your students. If you want to share that, that'll give people a sense of him.
Yeah, I did. When I was in the classroom still, I worked with Sharon Halprin, who works with the national, or not the national, the local Holocaust Council, and she was able to get a variety of speakers for me. But the kids always asked again for Abe, and we had an auditorium. We weren't as small as the school that you taught in, but our auditorium couldn't fit every single kid in the building. We had about 650 kids in the building, and then probably about 50 staff members. And so what we did is we took one grade level into the auditorium, and with Abe's permission, we had everything all set up so that there was a live feed camera. He got to wear a microphone, which he thought was, so exciting. And what that did is it allowed us to project a live feed into all the other grade level classrooms. So the students were basically watching it on like a great big huge, screen. They could hear him. They could even ask questions, because we used the back channel chat where the teachers in that room could type the students' questions. I would get them, and then I would ask Mr. Piacek the questions that the students had, and the students could hear their questions asked, live. And then when he was all done talking, we allowed the students to come down class by class to kind of meet him in person and take pictures. We always had all kinds of that. And I think I had him 5 or 6 years in a row come and speak to our students before I left the classroom for my current position. And every single time I heard him speak, and I heard him speak at professional developments and at the North Carolina Social Studies Conference, I always heard a different, vivid story. I mean, the fact that he can remember with such graphic detail, especially in the later part of his life, was just amazing to me. And the fact that the students and adults had an opportunity to hear history from a primary source, from the person who lived it. As a social studies teacher, like that is so key, so important to have those primary sources. And for you to pull up the primary sources of his documents, coming into the country, those are key, to show the map and to show the distance and the scale. And one thing I hope all of our viewers saw on that map is you pulled up a topographical map, where we could see that there was some dark colors there, which represented mountains. So that's why it couldn't be a straight route from point A to point B, and why it had to take a little bit longer.
Well,
I'm a little interested. Go ahead.
No, just to build on that, until I started studying, I didn't realize Auschwitz was chosen because of its central rail location, right? There wasn't an Auschwitz, the concentration camp. The Germans looked at the map. They had occupied Poland, and it's a rail center. And you start to then think about, how, with one of my students, after they had met Abe, we started talking about how many people were killed, and he started doing some calculations. If you Google Scientific American and the number of people killed, people know the number 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust, and 5 million at least other folks were killed. But 1.5 million people were killed in 3 months, in August, September, and October of 1942. If you do that math through, that's one murder every 6 seconds for more than 100 days. And that kind of, not to compare genocides, but the Rwandan genocide killed 800,000 people in 100 days. The Holocaust at its height was double that, and then it went on for 6 years. And when you get students to know one story, they can then start to ask, like Anthony Wilson was saying, it becomes less of an abstraction and more of a, oh my God. And that's what I think what today is about, and this month is, we're thinking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It really inspires them to want to learn more. They want to inquire, they want to research, they want to dig into it and make connections. And then, as social studies teacher, we always tell people, we learn about history so that we don't repeat it. We want to repeat the good things, we want to build on them, but all the bad things, all the horrific things that history has, we want to learn about them, because otherwise we're doomed to repeat them. We don't want to repeat these horrible atrocities.
Well, I think, and people often say that history, I forget whose quote it is, but history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, right? And so there are warning signals. And if you see groups of people being dehumanized and being treated with hate, that's a big warning that, hey, we need to address that. Again, that's, if we're indifferent, that's all evil needs to take over. And again, the Holocaust is, the most extreme example of what humans have done to one another. Slavery is another horrible atrocity, but the objective of slavery wasn't to kill, right? The objective of slavery is to turn people into property and and dehumanize. And it's similar, but there's a lot of the phrase I've been playing with is unearned suffering, and how unearned suffering is redemptive. And that's a quote from Martin Luther King. And there was nothing that, folks who were enslaved either in this country or in Germany did to deserve that. And, I think we need students to really confront difficult history. And Abe's story is a wonderful vehicle for doing that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Steve, I thank you so much for joining us. And I thank you so much for carrying on Abe's legacy. I know, having heard him speak multiple times myself, he was such a great man, and I love that he and every other survivor are willing to share their stories, so that we can learn. We can hear the different perspectives. We can get full accounts. I mean, the Germans did a great job of keeping records, but it's always different when you can hear directly from someone. So thank you so much for being friends with Abe. Thank you so much for carrying on his legacy and his message. I know all of our students, all of our educators, anybody else in the community that ever has a chance to hear from you has a chance to continue to learn about Abe. He was a very special guy. And I mean, when I saw in the news that he had passed, I did some ugly crying myself, because he was a great man. And here I am trying to compose myself again, because he was such a wonderful, wonderful guy. He really was. So thank you so much. So I encourage everybody out there, if you are a teacher, whether you're in a private school, a public school, a charter school, reach out to Steve, reach out to the local Holocaust Council, reach out to the Holocaust Museum in DC. They are willing to connect you with survivors. They are willing to have the survivors talk with your students so they can share their stories. If you visit the Holocaust Museum in DC's website, they actually have, for the past several years, been archiving recordings of survivors telling their stories. I think, and I could be quoting this wrong, but I think I heard that they have over 300 hours of recordings available that you can go listen to. So
They have
hear
more
those
than
different
that.
stories.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it grows all the time.
the trick is to, I think, get a manageable amount, because students aren't going to sit through. I mean, I sat through a 2-hour thing, but you want to pick moments and then be able to put it in context and get students asking questions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And again, anybody want to reach out to you, they can visit you on myfriendabe.com. Your contact information is there. That's how I got in touch with you. Both your email and your phone is there. And I know that you're more than excited to continue this. And as a social studies teacher, thank you for continuing the social studies effort. And thank you for telling Abe's story and for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And for everybody else that is joining us live, I want to thank everyone for joining us. And I'm going to wait for my screen to finish sharing. This is the beauties of remote working and working online. Sometimes the internet doesn't like to cooperate with us 100%, but we want to thank everyone for joining. And we want to encourage you to follow us on social media. Of course, we've got our DPS Celebrates, DPS Celebra, and Beyond the Celebrations hashtags. But we do have DPS Celebrates social media that you can follow us. You can see the great things that we have going on. You can gain access to all of our resources that we have on our DPS Celebrates website. And once again, we thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you all so much.